Welcome back to the Greater Greener Georgia podcast, where environmental justice meets political power. Today we're talking with Daniel Blackman, candidate for the Georgia Public Service Commission, one of the most powerful but least understood positions shaping our clean energy future. We'll dig into how the PSC's decisions impact climate, communities, and the fight for a just energy system. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe.
Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you
so much for joining us today. So I just want you to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you're running for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the ambiance. Thank you for the candle. You know, I feel very comfortable and very much excited about sharing this space with you. So Daniel Blackman, I'm the currently one of the Democrats running in the District 3 primary for the Georgia Public Service Commission, which is the only statewide constitutional office on the ballot this year. So I'm just super excited about the fact that we get to talk about issues that impact energy burden and the environment and the community. And so this is more of a rallying point. For those that don't know, I'm the former regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency. I was appointed under the Biden-Harris administration when we believed in science and climate change was a priority. But more than anything else, you know, I have been a long advocate of civil and human rights, energy justice, working and fighting for marginalized communities that are on the front line of some of the hardest hit environmental impacts in our country and in the history of our country. But outside of that, I'm a family guy that, you know, grew up in Columbus, Georgia. And, you know, shout out to Clark Atlanta, my alum. So, you know, I'm here and I'm thankful. Yeah. Shout out to the AUC.
Awesome. So we always start the podcast off with something fun, something, you know, lightweight, happy.
Okay.
So what do you like to do for fun? What are your guilty pleasures? Is there anything that you're like, yeah, it's just something I do that people might not know?
We're going to start off like that?
Yes.
I would say, so I'm going to give you the cheesy dad answer. So I am a huge Atlanta Dream WNBA fan.
Okay.
So my guilty pleasure with my daughter is literally throwing on an Atlanta Dream hoodie and taking my daughter to the game.
I love
and sitting down and letting her eat as much popcorn, cotton candy, and whatever she wants because that is our daddy-daughter time.
I love that.
But my own personal guilty pleasure, my family's from Barbados.
Okay.
So I love water.
Barbados.
Yeah, shout out to the Caribbean, man.
Shout out to the Caribbean.
So, but no, my guilty pleasure is water. I haven't done it in a long time, but I love to jet ski. When people think of being an outdoor enthusiast, I'm not the hiking person, if per se.
Neither am I.
Right? So I'm more of a give me a jet ski, give me some water. You know, I love being in spaces, even with the beach. You know, I'll go to the beach, I'll hang out. It's more about the kids.
Yeah.
But I just love being escaped in the water and just being just with the open air, man. So that's those would be the two that I would have.
Yeah, well, I've actually, funny enough, I'm a water baby as well. So,
Okay.
But I've never jet
When's your
skied.
birthday?
September 2nd.
I'm July, so we all the way water.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Labor Day weekend is always my birthday. It's always
Okay,
a great
okay.
time. So I actually have never jet skied, but I love to kayak. So
Oh, wow.
kayaking is a huge activity
you
in
can
my
have that.
family. And then I love a yacht every now and again. off
Okay,
the back,
okay,
you know,
all right.
just on the water. I love a boat. I never get seasick,
Okay.
ever. I actually love the turbulence on planes. It's actually really sickening how much I like motion.
Oh my
But
gosh.
so yeah, that's
Well,
like
I'll
a fun.
make a note not to travel with you.
Fuck that. Okay, so just describe the moment that we're living in as Americans. Where are we? What are the stakes? Is the situation in Georgia different in any way from the overall American situation?
So, look, you know, my family is from Barbados, as I mentioned earlier. My grandfather served as a diplomat, so my family got here by way of his service to the United Nations.
Wow.
And I think historically, in my lifetime, you know, I was fortunate to grow up in the 80s and the 90s, so I was able to see everything from the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the HIV and AIDS epidemic, the Rodney King situation, both, you know, wars in the Middle East, Desert Storm, and, you know, 9/11, the Columbine shooting. I don't think that this moment trumps, with no pun intended, any of those. I think what makes this moment different is how we define it, right? And that sounds very, hopelessly optimistic. But I feel like this generation has not had our 1968, right? Like we haven't had. John Lewis talked a lot about good trouble and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The Trump administration and what we're seeing today, I think, is our generation's Edmund Pettus Bridge, and not just because of the American situation, but globally, we're seeing this transition of ideologies. And I think the ideological transfer, somebody said this to me one time, they said, Daniel, you can look at change two ways. It's the darkness of the womb and the darkness of the tomb. They were like, the tomb represents, you know, burial and the ending, but out of a mother's womb comes birth,
Life,
right?
yeah.
Comes life. And so I think that something really great is going to come out of this generation of activists and from women, from minorities, from men. I mean, I think people are going to begin to see that they are going to be defined by how they respond in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was out of town. We were at a conference in San Francisco for LCV, and I was talking to my Uber driver. I have a habit of just talking to everybody. I don't mean a stranger. I'm organizing.
Yeah, me too.
So I was saying, well, you know, the pendulum was very far left for a long time.
Yeah.
And now, because of that, the reaction is that the pendulum is now swung the furthest it can go to the right. So just the way the world turns, eventually our actions will bring it back to the middle, to something where we can restore balance and peace and harmony and yin and yang. And so I'm all about the pendulum is very far right now. But eventually, just the way the world turns, it's going to have to come back to the middle. And we are going to be the change makers that are going to help.
I would slightly agree. I think that what you're saying makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
Where I tend to push back is that I think we've seen the most extreme of both, and I don't know that a middle exists anymore, right? I think that we're in a time where, you know, and again, I'm very much looking forward to a stronger future because I have 4 children that will grow up in this future that we're creating. But when I think of a middle, I don't know that a rational middle exists, right?
This is true.
I think there are commonalities that we'll find, but I think that what this moment requires is bold and disruptive leadership, so that even in the event that it comes remotely back towards our side or our beliefs or our values, we still can make sure that there are safeguards in place that allows people to grow, to evolve, to be free thinkers. So, but yeah, we're pretty much in the same area.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did you first learn about the PSC? Do you remember how old you were? Where were you? What was your introduction into the Public Service Commission?
So this is going to be a pretty different answer than I'm sure you would get. I remember, right, and I hate to invoke his name because of everything going on right now, but I remember during Hurricane Katrina when MTV interviewed Kanye West, and he said that George Bush don't care about black people. And I didn't understand what Kanye meant in that moment. And again, this is not an endorsement of Ye or where he's at right now, but like it made me say, why would he use that platform for this event? And it made me understand that Hurricane Katrina was so much more than just the lower Ninth Ward being flooded, right? So my introduction to, you know, the environmental space, let alone this Public Service Commission race, was a tremendous curiosity at 25 years old, where, you know, I looked at where I was and what that moment meant for me. And I went to New Orleans. We helped bring some families back. I got to meet folks that were activists. As a matter of fact, for those that don't know, this year is the 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
Right? And so 20 years ago this year, I realized that we did not have voices, and the picture that was being painted where we were climate refugees. We weren't scientists. We weren't leading federal agencies. We weren't engineers. And that was the narrative that had been painted until I began to meet people like Jerome Ringo, who ran the National Wildlife Federation. And I met Van Jones, and I started to meet activists like Catherine Flowers. And so it was a moment in my life where I began to see people that were doing things. And while I did not necessarily align with the level of activism they had, I began to find my space and my voice. And I'll never forget Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was one of my dearest friends and mentors. You know, he said, you don't have to limit being an activist to voting rights. Because at the time, all I knew was protecting the vote and fighting for police reform. And I realized that, you know what, environmental justice is just important as the vote being disenfranchised. In 2008, when Obama ran, that was the first time I understood that there was an actual position that could help me to take and elevate my ideas
Right.
and my value system.
Right.
And while I didn't run that year, it made me begin to pay attention. So I think as early as 2008 was when that spark happened.
Yeah.
And the first time I ran was 2014. I knew that I didn't have a chance to win the race being a new guy and not having a regulatory background at the time, but it made me focus on building the credentials, such as getting certified for national emergency management, going in and getting credentialed, working hard in the community, and ultimately being in a position where I could be a credible candidate.
Awesome. I think especially going back to Obama in 2008 and how impactful that was. I was in elementary school.
Yeah.
First president.
You trying to age me?
I'm not trying to age you, but that was the first president I went to an inauguration for.
Yeah.
You know, just how impactful his run was, especially for Black people who were in the activism space.
That's right.
Who decided to step into that because we saw what could be possible at the highest level. And I just think it's super inspiring. That he's my favorite president, by the way. Yeah, even though I've worked on other campaigns, shout out to Biden. He is my favorite president. And I think that it's just so great to hear how everybody's political story, especially for Black people, has some hint of Barack Obama, you know, and
that
just
moment.
to have that moment when it was like, wait, we can actually do something and we can actually accomplish it. And now is our time.
And I think what was special about that time really quickly was that I have Republican friends that have an Obama moment, right?
Wow,
I have friends that never supported a Democrat, never believed in Democratic ideology, but saw this as a transformative moment in their own lives. So when you talk about having that Obama connection, you know, I had a chance to experience some of it personally by meeting him as a U.S. Senator through Congressman John Lewis and working with him for about, 3 of his 8 years in office. But at the end of the day, I think that I would not have been inspired to seek the political route if it had not been for the introduction that I had to the Obama administration as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So has your understanding of how the PSC works changed over time? Was there an interaction or a moment that made you go, oh, okay, it's like that?
Yeah, the moment that changed for me was during the Obama administration. There was a woman named Gwen Keys Fleming, phenomenal former district attorney out of DeKalb County. She had become the regional administrator, a position that I would ultimately assume the role of. And she said, Daniel, I had been doing work with the Environmental Protection Agency independently on the education side and as a community advocate. And she said, come with us to Burke County, Georgia. And I remember going to Burke County and seeing a very familiar space, which was poverty. Right. I had a chance to travel a few times with Michelle Obama, our former First Lady, when she launched the Let's Move campaign. And when Michelle Obama launched that campaign, it was the first time I ever heard of food deserts. And so when I went to Burke County, I said, this is a food desert, it's a broadband desert, it's a, it's
desolate.
It was desolate. And the people of Burke County were prideful people. Like most other communities where there is a lack of economic opportunity, it's still someone's home, and there's a sense of dignity that comes along with that. Right. And so for me, what changed it was when we went to Burke County, I'll never forget, there was a church meeting on the expansion of nuclear plant Vogtle. And I remember as we were driving there from another location, I had been going to that location with Reverend Joseph Lowry and with a woman named Helen Butler, who has built her life and career on service, and especially in building vote, getting the vote out, registering voters with the Coalition for the People's Agenda. And we passed probably 20 police cars on the way to this meeting. And I said, wow, the people in this county are looking for someone to stand up on their behalf. And they don't have anyone that was willing at the time to really stand up against, the big utilities and against the local, leadership. And so I followed nuclear plant Vogtle for the entirety of its development, for every budget increase, every impact on ratepayers, every schedule that wasn't met. And it was the first time I engulfed myself in a political process. I've always read bills and been intrigued with bills, but I followed this to a T, and I followed how it impacted the community. I followed the Savannah Riverside impact. I followed what happened around coal ash in North Carolina and in Juliet, Georgia. And as I began to own and understand the issues, it made this an issue and a position that I was very much committed to.
Right, absolutely. So I love the commitment, and that takes me to my next question of why are you running for the Public Service Commission, and what's currently happening now and the state of the race, and how is that impacting your outlook on the road ahead?
I'm running now. This wasn't even on my radar a year ago. A year and a half ago, as a matter of fact, a year at this moment, my hope was to help President Biden get reelected. And, I had just launched my business in Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta for 20 years, and this was a time for me to come back to Atlanta. It was a time where, I have 2 children that are older. We're very family oriented. Unfortunately, over the last several years since COVID, I've lost about 3 or 4 family members.
Wow.
And so we really were interested in just returning to, and just building our legacy where it started. My wife went to Spelman College. I went to Clark Atlanta. And we felt that it was time to be back home. And we began to make this transition. And I'll tell you, when I decided to run for this race, it wasn't until after the Secretary of State made a decision in February of this year that it would be on the ballot. And so it was intriguing because, as you can imagine, with my history in this state and what I've done around, from every corner of Georgia, I began to get a lot of phone calls. And the biggest challenge, right now, I'm going to get a little personal here. The biggest challenge for me was that I had run for this seat in 2020.
I worked on that campaign, by the way.
I appreciate it.
I did.
And you got to imagine, we started in 2019. We ran extraordinarily hard, and we made it to a runoff that took me into 2021. Right? Once we got to 2021, within 3 months, I got a call from the White House Office of Personnel Management that said, you're on the short list to run a federal agency. We can't disclose, but we'd like you to submit your information. This comes directly from, the transition team. And understand that from 2019 to 2024, I gave my life as a candidate or as a federal administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, which means that from 2019, 2020, 21, 21, 22, 23, 24, 6 years, I gave my life to service, neglecting my family, I missed my son's senior year in high school. So it was very hard for me to, in good faith, look my family in the eye and say, I'm going to run for a position that not only is to fill a term for 1 year, but I'm going to run again next year. That would have given me a total of 8 years where my priority and commitment has been to service. And so really it was tough to make the decision, but knowing that my family was rooting me on. I have 3 sons and a daughter, and getting them to understand that, Dad, this is what you do. And as a father, Black men have traditionally gotten a bad rap on our ability to be good parents and good fathers. And I'm, in my opinion, very fortunate to have a family that sees and understands our role as a family. I don't know what Coretta Scott King and Bernice King and Martin III had to go through. And I'm not comparing myself to them. But anytime you give yourself to service, any family, whether it's politically, as an entrepreneur, or as a community leader, we don't realize that the same as a military family, because my dad served in the military, when they serve, your family serves. So when I made the decision, it was increasingly hard, but it was necessary. And to answer your second part about where the campaign is, we've gone through a very challenging moment where our credibility in this race has been challenged. I am beyond offended. We have had to work very hard. I lived in Atlanta for almost 20 years. I lived in Atlanta for 18 years, from coming to college in '97 to deciding that we want to invest. We want to be in different parts of the state. We thought nothing of it. We made this out of a pure place of this is a decision that's in the best interest of our family. And look, the Constitution of Georgia gives anyone the right to challenge. And I have no doubt in my mind that regardless of why the challenge came, we were prepared for it. And what I'm most disappointed about is when news is reported, we get the story and the narrative that's painted versus what I just explained to you. People don't see the fact that I have had to be in Atlanta. I've had to live in Atlanta. I've had to work in Atlanta. My wife has worked in Atlanta for 15 years. I've worked in Atlanta for 20 years. Atlanta has always been our home, right? But when you have people that, one, don't know you, don't know your integrity, don't know your heart, don't know your family,
care less, yeah.
they can care less. So where we are today is that we went through an administrative hearing. We presented evidence that we felt was in the best interest of my candidacy. We put forth the absolute best case of what we could argue. It didn't go in our direction. We didn't complain. We didn't murmur. We did not argue. We said that we're going to stand on what we know, and we're not going to point fingers. And as that process went forward, we ultimately were disqualified by the Secretary of State in Georgia.
Yep.
And we still respect the process. And I want everyone to know and to hear this from me. There is a system in the United States that, when utilized correctly, it works. And it does not matter what hearings happen. There is a reason why there was an appeal process. We filed for that appeal process, and we want to thank Fulton County, and we want to thank every other instance that we can name for allowing us to make our case. And we will continue, because this race isn't about my candidacy or me staying on the ballot. This race is about an organization, the Public Service Commission, that very few people know about, that very few people understand, that 5 people that are taking resources, money, and gifts from folks that are in the ecosystem of what they regulate. We're not running against the Public Service Commission. I'm not running against the candidates in the primary. I'm running for the people of Georgia. And that means that when you are in middle Georgia, rural, coastal, North Georgia, or Metro Atlanta, and your kid has asthma, or your mother or father is a senior citizen on a fixed income, or you are a working single mother trying to keep your lights on, I can care less about an accusation because I know who I'm fighting for.
Absolutely. That's beautiful, knowing who you're
And by the way, Fulton has put us back on the ballot until we are able to resolve the appeal, and we will continue to be respectful of the entirety of this process.
Absolutely. And you were on my ballot, so I can verify yesterday when I went to early vote that he was on the
Early
ballot.
vote, y'all. You got to early vote, and make sure June 17th is the election day.
Absolutely. So we know that we have to transition to renewable energy as soon as possible to make the impacts of climate change less severe. Georgia Power has a huge role in playing that, but it doesn't seem like they are moving enough with urgency. At the same time, Georgia Power might say that they're working to meet the human demand for electricity, that it's not just on them, but it's on us and them together. They didn't invent social media, a big driver of these data centers that the company projects will use as much electricity as, you know, every household in Georgia. Where do you fall? And is climate change an individual responsibility, or do we need to prioritize fixing the systems like our energy grid
You
first?
just gave me a whole script,
I know, right?
girl. You just gave me a whole thing to answer. But I'm a good listener. At least my mom, I'd like to think my mom believes that as well. Look, on a very serious note, where we are is that Georgia Power is the absolute driver of Georgia's renewable future. Let's just make no argument about it, because the utility companies and the way the Public Service Commission uses regulatory power determines what types of investment will come into Georgia.
Right.
We have to have a combination, before I answer the question, of how we look at what's considered a just transition. Many of your listeners and viewers may be familiar, but for those that are not, a just energy transition is our ability to determine the environmental and the investment side of how we are going to look at a mix of moving further away from fossil fuels and into clean energy, whether that's solar, wind, battery storage, so on and so forth. Where I stand is that we have failed as a country on making sure that we bring in the federal government, the public and private sector, and also those who are elected at a state level, including those who are working to regulate these corporations, right? So that is a whole lot of ingredients that goes into one cake being baked, right? But at the end of the day, I wholeheartedly don't feel that Georgia Power or the Public Service Commission has done enough to encourage and drive investment and conversation around rooftop solar, community solar. I've done a tremendous amount of work with the Ray C. Anderson Foundation. There is a push for more right-of-way solar. We in the state of Georgia and in the South can do more to protect the longevity and the investment. We've seen it with Q-Cells in North Georgia. We've seen multiple car companies come to Georgia, including Hyundai and Kia, that have said, we want to build our electric vehicles here. But when you, and when you look, which is what frustrates me more than anything else, say what you want about former President Biden and former Vice President Harris. We led the largest infrastructure investment in the history of this country.
Ever.
Not since the New Deal has there been an investment by the federal government, $1.2 trillion through the bipartisan infrastructure law, bipartisan, right? This wasn't a Democratic or a far left or progressive space. This was 1.2 trillion that would be designated to invest into rebuilding our roads, our bridges, and our infrastructure to address PFAS, right? And forever chemicals in our water, to address dicamba, which are chemicals that in fact are agriculture. Georgia and many southern states are agricultural states. We partnered with the University of Georgia and land-grant colleges that are HBCUs like Fort Valley, right? We've done the work. And now we have entered into a time where not just at a Public Service Commission level, but the President of the United States recently announced that they're going to go back and roll back the PFAS ruling, right? So forever chemicals that have caused cancer, that have harmed communities, harmed brain development, these are being rolled back under the auspices of it was too woke. And that, quite frankly, pisses me off because I understand how important this moment is. So when you think of where we are today, we can no longer rely on our big utility companies to take the lead. We need our state senators, our state house members. We need to have every single one of our county commissioners. We need to educate these people. When you talk about data centers, look, the governor of this state gave a free pass and a tremendous amount of money, over $200 million, to allow data centers to come into Georgia. And I personally believe that data centers are critical. I mentioned my children. They're on Snapchat. They're on Google, right? They're on Instagram and TikTok. I've got about 20,000 emails that's just sitting in the cloud right now that I've never opened because it's junk mail. We need data centers. One of the things that sets me apart in this race is when cryptocurrency was at its height and data mining was going on in states like Kentucky, I was able to work on the regulatory and implementation phase of addressing those issues. And I want to bring that same leadership into the state because I believe that data centers, while they have a tremendous positive impact economically, if we don't put safeguards in place and community benefits, it will cause much more harm than good.
And they already have. I mean, we're part of a big coalition from all these groups that are just like ours across America. It's called Athena, where they are all combating data centers coming into their state. And a lot of the states that are having them, we're the states that have a lot of land to give. And one of the biggest things is especially what we were doing in the legislative session this year, was we are wanting data centers to pay their fair share. I am not going to pay your electricity bill at your data center. No way.
What you add to our grid should not be on the backs of hardworking families, because when the cost of living goes up, right, their pay stays the same. When a senior citizen on fixed incomes, utilities go up and bills go up, there's no medium. And when the President of the United States is using executive orders to cut low income and heat and energy assistance programs, we have people that are going to be stuck. And I think that what needs to happen is, to your point, we need data centers to go all in on what they do and be accountable. Because if they fail, guess what? When they're still there, the community still pays for it. And we need to make sure that we protect ratepayers and hardworking families.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Sparta, Georgia, a railroad company has controversially used eminent domain to seize land from a majority Black community to expand its business interest. The company says that the increase in tax revenue for the county, which is around $1 million a year, means that it's in the public's interest for them to do so. Now, railroads fall under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission at the same time as the commission was scheduling a hearing on this situation in Sparta, where they would decide if the company could take the land. The owner of the railroad company donated thousands of dollars to the campaigns of the Public Service Commissioners. Do you think that that's appropriate? Why or why not? And do you think that it's ever in the public's interest for a private company to be able to use eminent domain?
I know you didn't just ask me if I think it's appropriate for them to get money from. No, look. If at the core of the legislation that was originally crafted in the United States that dealt with eminent domain, it was for far more of a purpose than private usage, right? There had to be certain metrics in place that I won't go all the way into now that were established to ensure that eminent domain was in the best interest of the public and had a specific need for government entities and agencies that were going to utilize that. The Public Service Commission started off as a railroad commission, right? And when you look at the history of the PSC, we have now entered into a time since, the mid-70s until today, the modern time, where it has hyper-focused on gas, electricity, and telecommunications. The fact that they are weaponizing eminent domain is a problem. The fact that this is happening to a Black family where white families are showing up and saying this is wrong. This is not just like some kind of racist thing that's happening, that it's like the controversy, for example, behind Black Lives Matter, where people didn't understand. This is people that are saying this is wrong, this is illegal, this is not right. So number one, absolutely it's wrong to take money. It's one thing, which I don't agree with, to take money from utilities in which you regulate. This is absolutely egregious that candidates for the Public Service Commission, during a time where folks are fighting to keep what they own, are using the power of the pen and their regulatory power to establish this. In 1906, Black folks in this country owned 18 million acres of land. By 1997, that number was south of 3 million acres of land. The amount of land through heirs' rights and through property grabs, through the lottery systems during the Jim Crow era, has depleted the ability for many Black families and many rural families to build wealth. And I think that this is probably the worst modern day example that I have seen. I am beyond frustrated. And the fact that, back to your earlier question, we're talking about a candidate challenge and we're not talking about an actual decision that has been made that's impacting a family right now is a problem.
Yeah, it absolutely is a problem. And I think that the way we've weaponized just having ownership and having somebody say to you, hey, for the good of all of us, what you've owned, what you've come into, what you probably fought to get in the first place, is something that we can come into your community, into your home, and take away from you, or invest in other places and, you know, kind of take away your rights and subvert that. And it's sad that the commissioners that we do have are not fighting for the actual people in which have put them in office.
Agreed.
And so that's really frustrating for me, and it was hard to hear about that story, because how many other people have also suffered through that, and maybe we just don't know about it, in decisions that have been made that maybe there wasn't media there or people that were able to speak out, you know, those kind of unsung people who don't really get their voices heard, and not having commissioners who care about the people that nobody cares about.
That's right.
So I'm going to get off my soapbox. So you've run for office before, coming just short in the January 15th, 2021 runoff, which we talked about earlier, that saw Senators Warnock and Ossoff elected to the United States Senate. But before that, you were the first Black man to run for office in Forsyth County.
That's right.
Which was famously sort of a de facto segregated until the late 80s. How is it there now, and what misconceptions might people have about North Georgia?
I think there are a lot of misconceptions around North Georgia, and Forsyth County is a great place to raise your family. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, I would have argued against that, because the images we saw were predominantly from 1987 with the Brotherhood March that Hosea Williams led, and Oprah Winfrey ultimately hosting her show.
Right.
I work to this day with the family of Hosea Williams. I was interviewed by Oprah and her team, and you know, I've done many stories, and my time of fully being committed in Forsyth County, Georgia, taught me a lot. I mean, on the one hand, I don't know that I would have wanted my eldest children to grow up in a different place. Does Forsyth County have issues? Absolutely, right? Every city and county in America has it, especially in the South, right? There's a running joke that says that the South is the most integrated place on a Saturday for college football and the most segregated place on a Sunday during church.
Come on.
Right? So, I mean, we can celebrate together in the SEC, but we don't worship together. And so I would say this, right? Forsyth County, when I ran, was a very different place than leading up to us returning to Atlanta, right? And the reason why I say it like that is because you got to understand Forsyth County. It's one of those areas where the folks that live there now didn't really come there during the mid 80s and early 90s. So you have this transient community that came for tech, for good schools, and most people don't know this. And I'll tell your viewers, Forsyth County is now a majority minority school district, and most people don't know that.
Yeah, I would know
the same place that has been called a sundown town 20 years ago, same Lake Lanier that folks say don't go to Lake Lanier.
Don't go.
You know, but at the same time, we now see the fastest growing East Indian population. We have a Hispanic population that is now rivaling counties similar to Hall. When you ask me about North Georgia, I want to say this. From Dahlonega to Rabun County, when you look at Hall County, when you look at portions of Gwinnett, North Forsyth, I'm proud of North Georgia.
Yeah.
North Georgia has gotten such a bad rap because people have not been there. I'm not asking you to go to Blue Ridge for the weekend to get a cabin. I'm not asking you to Helen, Georgia, right? Because you just want to go and get some good food
Right.
and go to the beer fest. I'm asking you to really understand that the people in North Georgia have been left out of a lot of conversations, and they are good people.
Yeah.
People like June Chris, who are up there, that have been doing work for Democratic women for a long time.
Right.
Areas where you wouldn't be caught dead putting a Democratic yard sign in your front yard, right? Because let's be honest,
Yeah.
this is still Trump country up there. It's still
Yeah.
areas where they are very much not connected from the impact that a city like Atlanta or the Metro Atlanta region would have on them, because they have lived in a certain way for so long
Right.
that a combination of tradition and family values have orchestrated who they are. But I will say this, I couldn't be more proud of the people of North Georgia,
Yeah.
because they have begun to build a legacy that is not defined by decades of injustice, but by where they are going, not from learning from where they've been to redefine where they're going. And I would say the same about coastal Georgia, because folks down in Savannah and Brunswick and Pooler and Liberty counties, we live in a big state, and we tend to leave rural Georgia, coastal Georgia, and North Georgia out of this greater conversation, which is why, going back to one of your earlier questions, I'm running. I'm running because I believe in these places that have yelled from the mountaintops that haven't been heard, and they deserve to have voice. They deserve to have representation, and more than anything else, they deserve to be a part of this conversation long term, but also in the immediate decisions that we're making.
Absolutely. And you know, when I look you up on Google, your thing, it says that you're a statesman. And I hope you guys know that this is what a statesman is. Somebody that knows their state. He's literally almost talked about all four corners of Georgia, and he's running for a position that will be representing
Metro Atlanta.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
so it's just like he knows the state. So even when when he does successfully get into this seat, I believe in speaking things into existence.
Yeah.
What more perfect than a person that knows what they're talking about and can connect to people that are all around the state making decisions for the state of Georgia. I think that's incredible. So I want to sit in on a point of, when it's all said and done, politically, as a man, as a legacy, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to leave behind? What is the impact you want to leave on this world, on the state of Georgia? You can make that answer as big as you want or as minute as you want.
I will say, I'm going to answer that two ways. From a political legacy, the most valuable lesson I've learned to date, or at least one of them, I was in Juliet, Georgia, when the coal ash situation was massively impacting families there. And I go down to Juliet one time, and there is a home with a Daniel Blackman yard sign and a Donald Trump yard sign.
Wow.
And I'm looking like, is somebody running a prank on these people? Like, so I knock on the door.
Yeah.
And I asked this woman, I said, hey, I'm Daniel Blackman. And she kind of looks awkward. She says, I've never met a candidate, right?
Wow.
And I said, well, I was just curious, why'd you put your sign up? And she said, how much time do you have? And I paused because I didn't know what that meant. And she explained to me like this. She said, Mr. Blackman, the creek that I grew up in is so contaminated now that I can't bring my grandchildren in this water.
Wow.
She said, where I built my best memories, I have struggled because the utility companies have not taken into regard my friends who have lost their lives, to everything from throat cancer to old age. And she said, I read about you. And she said, I've never voted for a Democrat in the 40 years of me being a Republican. Wow. But what I wanted to tell you was that we need more people like you that don't put politics ahead of what people really need. A couple of months into my service as a regional administrator, Gary Black, who was the former Republican agricultural commissioner, said to me that he said, people like you represent the future of our state. It's not that I want to just hyper focus on what Republicans have said. I know where I stand with progressive voters. I know where I stand with Black and brown and marginalized communities.
Right.
When I begin to hear, when you bring up the word statesman, I look at Jimmy Carter and how he lived his life and his legacy. And when it's all said and done, I want people to describe my life in one word, and that's service. Because I believe that when you truly serve people, it will allow them to see the person and not the Democrat or the Republican or the Independent or the Libertarian.
Right.
as far as on a personal level, where I ultimately want to be, when these lights go off and when these folks finish watching this amazing show and hearing this conversation, nobody cares about any of this more than my wife and my children. At the end of the day, only they know what they've had to endure by me giving my life to service.
Yeah.
And there's going to come a day where no one's going to remember the challenge. Nobody's going to remember me running for office. Nobody's going to remember the great quotations that I gave during a speech. They might remember this interview. But what I mean by all that, and I'll say this in closing, is that when the lights are off, when nobody is asking for you or checking for you, I'm still going to be Anais, Zion, Mike, and Aaliyah's dad. I'm still going to be Janelle's husband. I'm still going to be Diana Rudolph's son. I'm going to be Rudy and Ryan's brother. And nothing else matters to me than being able to have not embarrassed your family and to have made your family members have a bigger and better opportunity at success than what was handed to me.
Yeah. What a legacy. What a legacy to look back and say, my great-great-granddaddy was Daniel Blackman.
All right now. All right now.
A legacy. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us today. Thank you for being so candid and open and leading with a heart and letting people see you and see you as the public servant that you are.
Yeah.
You're incredible. I think that you've already done so many amazing things,
Yeah.
and I just can't wait to see how much further you go and how much you do to impact our state for the better. So thank you so much for joining us.
Much is given, much is required.
Come on.
Thank you.
Come on.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much,
All
Mr.
right.
Blackman, for joining us
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, guys.
All right.